Throughout history, countless forms of torture were inflicted on people of all ages and genders. However, a significant portion of these torments was specifically directed towards women. Many of them were subjected to relentless persecution, accused of witchcraft. Today, we'll tell you about some of the terrible tortures they endured. One of the most commonly practiced was the breast ripper. To carry out this torture, an instrument shaped like pincers with 4 sharp points was used. The 4 points, either red hot or almost frozen, were placed on the women's breast, tearing them apart. This was used on those who had been condemned for crimes such as heresy, blasphemy, adultery, witchcraft, or libidinous acts. It served both as a punishment and as a method of interrogation. Often this punishment was inflicted on single mothers while their children were in their arms. With the heated instrument on her chest splattering blood onto the babies, the woman writhed in pain on the ground. One famous case was that of Anna Pappenheimer, accused of witchcraft in Germany in the year 1600. It is said that a captured thief blamed her and her family. After being tortured with the breast ripper in front of her children, she had to endure the flaying and tearing of her flesh. Her breasts were cut into pieces, and afterwards they were rubbed on her children's faces, ultimately forcing the young ones to eat their mother's severed breasts. Another variant of this instrument is the iron spider. The purpose is the same, but the device had 6 claws and 2 parts for gripping, forming a total of 8 points that slightly resembled the structure of a spider. It was attached to a wall, and the woman's breasts were fixed to the claws of the tool. Then she was pulled away from the wall, tearing her breasts off. Aside from the extreme physical pain, this torture also aimed to dehumanize a woman by attacking her symbol of femininity. The next torture is the mask, scold, bridle. A tool designed to punish women accused of being gossips, telling lies, grumbling, or engaging in witchcraft or conversations with the devil. The purpose of this device was to prevent women from uttering a single word, forcing them to pay for their supposed sins. Its use was promoted by the church under the belief that physical punishment was the only way people could cleanse their souls. It was not only a method of torture, but also a way to humiliate them. The mask consisted of a kind of iron cage attached to a piece of metal that was inserted into the condemned woman's mouth. The function of this piece of metal was to press the woman's tongue against the roof of her mouth, preventing her from speaking during the time she wore it, which could last for days or weeks. Besides the discomfort, it also had many other effects, such as mouth fatigue or excessive salivation, making it agonizing not to be able to remove the device from her head. Some sources indicate that variants were made with iron spikes inside, which injured the woman's tongue. And because of this, many of them ended up with mutilated tongues. As if the torture itself was not enough, the punishment did not end with the use of this device, as the woman also had to undergo the so-called walk of shame, accompanied by her husband. Historians indicate that the man would attach a leash to his wife, who wore the iron mask, and they would walk through the towns while she was humiliated with insults. Some say the husband encouraged the neighbors to insult the victim and even spit on her. Sometimes the woman would wear a bell on top, drawing even more attention during the fateful walk. The most dramatic days ended with people lunging at the condemned women, hitting and shaking them by the head, causing damage to their teeth, broken jaws, bleeding, and even vomiting. It was widely used in places like England, Scotland, and Wales, and today several cities in England have some of these masks displayed in museums. Another method of cruel punishment was the shrews fiddle. Although the object used resembled a violin in shape, this was the only similarity to the string instrument. It was a device with a large opening for the neck and 2 smaller openings for the wrists. The victim's head would be locked in place and her arms immobilized, handcuffed in front of her face. Sometimes a bell was attached to alert the townspeople that the condemned woman was approaching so she could be mocked or humiliated. It was a way to punish women who were always arguing or those who exhibited behavior that deviated from established norms. The pear was another method of torture used in antiquity. As the name suggests, the instrument was shaped like a pear, narrow at one end and wider at the other. The punishment could be oral, anal, or vaginal. In the case of women, who are the focus of today's video, the instrument was inserted into their vagina. Once inside, the device would open and expand, causing severe tears. There was even a more terrifying variant in which, when opened, it would deploy metal spikes, making the tears even more severe and causing significant hemorrhaging. Adultery was not considered the same if committed by a man or a woman. In the Middle Ages, the laws granted husbands the power to take the life of their wives or punish them personally if they were betrayed. In ancient laws of the Crown of Aragon, for example, it was stated that once infidelity was proven, the man could lock the woman in a small room without doors or windows, which had only an opening to provide water and food. It was common for the woman to be killed by her husband or father, and for the man to be exempt from responsibility for the crime by the king and forgiven by her relatives. Another instrument believed to have been used as a method of preventive torture was the chastity belt, a kind of iron underwear which was locked with a key. Its use and existence in the Middle Ages is disputed, but the most widespread version is that it was used to ensure women's fidelity, especially when their husbands were absent for long periods or in extreme cases. Fathers who forced their daughters to wear them to maintain their purity until they were married. Once locked, it was impossible for a man to have intercourse with a woman, as there were spikes right in the vaginal area that would impale him. Its use in ancient times is questioned, since some experts argue that if a woman wore it for many days, she would die from infections and abrasions caused by direct contact with the metal. For some scholars, this belt was used as a defense against possible assault. So some nurses or nuns who attended to the wounded on battlefields wore it to protect themselves as a kind of shield, so that no soldier could take advantage of them. Another torment, which we've already mentioned in the water torture special, is the ducking stool. This torture was primarily used on women accused of heresy or those who continually argued with people, being a nuisance to the rest of the neighbors. Anyone could present themselves before the authorities and accuse one of their neighbors of being a scold. The authorities would investigate the case, and if they found sufficient evidence, they would proceed to arrest the woman and subject her to this torture. It consisted of a chair where the victim was forcibly seated and her torso, arms, and legs were tied down so that she could not move. The chair was attached to a long wooden beam that acted as a lever to raise it into the air, and then they would lower it into the water of a deep river, where they kept the woman submerged for several seconds. After that, they would lift her out and then submerge her again, causing her immense agony. The length of time the victims were kept underwater depended on the executioner. The intention was not to kill them, but to lift them just before they lost consciousness from drowning, thus creating a terrible physical and psychological torture, leading to anxiety attacks and even hypothermia due to the cold water. This torture was also used on those accused of practicing witchcraft. For these women, the chair method did not seem sufficient, so they eventually set aside the wooden apparatus and tied them to a rope with a stone. If they floated, it confirmed they were witches. If they sunk, it confirmed their innocence, though unfortunately, when this happened, it was often too late for many. The witch hunts were one of the most significant reasons for the torture of women in ancient times. In 1485, the Inquisitor Henry Institoris witnessed the trial of Helena Stierberin, a woman accused of practicing witchcraft, having many lovers and killing them with her powers. She was a bold and independent woman. She was not afraid to speak her mind and had even dared to interrupt a sermon by Institoris to publicly tell him that he was an evil person. The man continued his interrogation, asking her about the alleged witch sexual practices, providing lurid details consumed by anger, which began to discomfort the others, to the point that the bishop's representative, irritated, ordered him to stop the spectacle. The trial ended poorly for the inquisitor, as the commission freed the supposed witch and he had been humiliated. He was ridiculed and was not going to allow something like that to happen again. So Institoris vowed never to let a witch escape again. He secluded himself for some time and, together with a monk, wrote one of the most famous medieval texts, the Malleus Maleficarum, which means the Hammer of Witches. It was reprinted about 15 times, and 30,000 copies were distributed throughout Europe during those years of superstitious hunts. During that time, judges used it in all their processes. It explained what witchcraft was, why it was a crime, and how to hunt witches, with the questions to ask and the answers to listen for. The women accused of witchcraft usually had a trade: cooks, healers, peasants, midwives, and they carried out their activities using knowledge that was their own. They could distinguish plants, knew healing remedies, or find poisons, and they were very influential. They became a threat to those in power, as they challenged the notions of submission, domesticity, and maternal care expected of them. Therefore, they were tortured and killed, sending a message to others that such behavior would not be tolerated. One of the tortures described in the manual was first to strip them naked and force them to confess how long they had been witches and to reveal the names of others like them. They were stripped to prevent the existence of a spell hidden in the clothing. When they refused to confess, they were shown the torture instruments, and if they still did not admit it, the torture began. One of the tortures, for example, was to tie their arms behind their backs and use a pulley to suspend them in the air, nearly dislocating them. They even tied weights to their feet to increase the pain. Many died during the torture. Some were burned at the stake, and others were hung with a rope. It was common to see dead women hanging from ropes in some village areas. Typically, hysteria against witches broke out during times of crisis, epidemics, poor harvests. There were problems, and they wanted to find someone to blame. They were accused of casting spells against the community and causing the evil eye to others. The Hammer of Witches manual also detailed that it was not enough to strip the witch. They also had to shave the places used to hide their malevolence, clarifying that they had to shave the pubic hair. What kind of malevolence could be hidden behind a woman's pubic hair? These tortures involved sexual subjugation. One of the tests used to discover witches was the weight test. It was believed that witches were light, since they could fly or float on water. According to the people of that time, this reduced weight was explained by the belief that the witch had lost her soul by giving it to the devil. Therefore, women suspected of being witches were placed on a scale, and if they weighed less than a certain amount, they were formally accused. However, it wasn't so easy to escape the sentence even if the weight was higher, as sometimes they were accused of having bewitched the scale with the power of the devil, and in other places the scale was manipulated. The city of Oudewater in the Netherlands was famous for having a scale where they weighed suspected witches and issued documents certifying that they had a normal weight and were not witches. Another torture that you surely know due to its gruesome nature is the saw. This is one of the most brutal torments that could be inflicted on a prisoner. In the case of women, this type of torture was reserved for those who were believed to have been impregnated by Satan. To end the supposed demonic child they carried inside, the woman would be hung upside down by her legs. A saw was then used to cut her in half, starting from the bottom and moving up to her abdomen. The steel teeth of the saw would cut through the victim easily, causing immense pain. Due to the inverted position of the body, it ensured that enough oxygen reached the brain and prevented total blood loss. According to 19th century accounts, the victim would not lose consciousness until the saw reached the navel or even the chest. In this way, she remained alive for quite some time, feeling the pain of the saw cutting her body in half. We could still name hundreds more tortures inflicted on women. Cigarette burns, abuse by the jailers themselves, some of whom ended up pregnant. Introduction of rats into the vagina, and countless other terrible and inhuman punishments. Which of these torments has surprised you the most? Do you believe that women in ancient times were punished more harshly than men? We look forward to hearing your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!